Hi everyone, this is Connor Downey, and you are listening to the Vitalis Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to Vitalis. I am Connor Downey, and I'm your host. Episode number 2. So another step forward on this journey. I am really hoping over the next several episodes to break down in series what I would consider kind of the next steps or the primary steps in detoxifying your life, getting on the proper lifestyle and health path that so many people want to. So I'm grateful and happy to be here and be talking to you all today. Cut through the noise, uncover the truth, and really delineate between medicine and longevity and holistic health practices and all of the topics that we're diving into. I really think today's episode, which is all about limiting toxic exposure, how to detoxify certain areas of your life, and how to just ultimately live a toxic-free life. I feel like this is the first step for so many people in a lifelong journey for health. A lot of times we see that toxicity and these things that we're exposed to on such a frequent basis ultimately impact our lives by kind of putting the brakes on our goals towards health. And especially in our body too, when we're trying to optimize everything, we're trying to work more for our body and less against our body. We start noticing that toxicity is one of those things, like I said, that is like putting your foot on the brake while you're trying to drive fast. So I'm hoping today when we dive into toxins and how to detoxify your life, we can really step into giving you insights to take your foot off the brake so that way everything else we release as far as nutrition and supplementation and diet and exercise and all these other topics that we'll dive into, as well as all the other tools that we'll kind of give you guys along the way, that we're able to embark on this very first step and give you the necessary starting point. So again, thank you for joining me. Obviously today, stepping into toxins, talking about toxins, they're all around us. They're in our clothes, they're in our food, they're in our water, they're in pretty much just everything that we have surrounding us. So my goal today is to really expose ways that we can get around these toxins, cheap and effective or easy ways that you can kind of step into living a toxic-free life. And we're going to dive into things like, what are the most common toxins that are affecting our body? How do we detox our liver and our gut and get our hormones online appropriately? Things like EMF, hormonal-based birth control. We're going to be talking about our water. We're going to be talking about our cooking. So really the big 3 that I want to tap into today that are the most important are definitely our water, what we're using to cook with, and then, of course, our daily products. So our toiletries, cosmetics, things like that. We're going to be talking a lot about the research today and the studies that are out there around these toxins, and then hopefully giving you guys some really good tools that you can start with. So if you're ready to understand what's really in your environment, how to reduce your toxic load, let's get started. Now, the very first topic I really want to dive into with you guys today is about BPA. So BPA, BPS, BPF. A lot of people don't know that there's other forms of BPA, or there's kind of mimickers. So really what we see is so many people hear about BPA-free. We see, BPA-free plastics are quote-unquote safe. But the reality is that manufacturers replace BPA with things like BPS and BPF. And they really have been shown in some of the research to be just as harmful. So my goal is to kind of open up the window so people kind of understand that not necessarily when something says BPA free, we're going to talk about BPAs, we're going to talk about phthalates as well. So a really great person in this space, I really recommend listening to her, Dr. Shauna Swan. She is the leading environmental and reproductive epidemiologist. She authored a book called Countdown, and then she's really, I would say, the foremost expert in these topics that we're about to discuss right now, as far as BPA and all of these endocrine disruptors and phthalates and things like that. So, one of the key things that she actually mentions, which is super interesting. She was on the Huberman podcast. If you haven't listened to Andrew Huberman's podcast, go and check it out. A lot of really incredible insights. But she specifically quotes that BPA free does not mean BPA safe. BPS and BPF have similar effects on hormone disruption and fertility, and they are now found in over 90% of Americans' urine samples. So that's huge. Obviously, we see that this is a big issue, not just BPA, but now we're looking at BPS and BPF. So as we start looking at these components, we also look at things like phthalates, and phthalates are endocrine disruptors just like BPA is. We see them in plastics, cosmetics, fragrances, certain food packaging, and interesting things. We see that phthalates make plastic flexible. BPAs are making plastic rigid and hard. And we see that they're direct hormone disruptors. So, even when in the concerns of phthalates, because they're right in line with BPA. And then as we kind of step into microplastics, when we talk about that, we see that all of these chemicals, BPAs, phthalates, they're all directly lowering testosterone, disrupting estrogen, and increasing the risk of reproductive disorders. So just to quote a study, there's a 2021 study published in the Environmental Health and Perspectives, found that higher phthalate exposure is associated with lower testosterone levels in men and increased risk of early puberty in women. We also see that phthalates are directly linked to obesity, insulin resistance, and infertility. So these hormone disruptors are directly in the cans, the cosmetics, the plastic wraps, the food containers, the deodorants. Phthalates specifically are in a lot more of our daily use items like candles, air fresheners, shampoos, deodorants that are disrupting our endocrine systems. As far as BPAs and BPSs and BPFs, they are notoriously found in cans. So the best thing to do is look for things like glass or stainless steel for food storage, and water bottles. That's a really good way to avoid BPAs and their mimickers. Never microwave food in plastic, even if it shows microwave safe. So stay away from kind of the trap of microwaving food in these plastic containers that are containing, the BPAs or BPSs and BPFs, as well as looking into, obviously, how do we reduce our exposure to phthalates? So phthalates, obviously, we talked about some of the places that you can find them at. One of the really easy ways to avoid phthalates and kind of start looking at some of the products that you're using, there's a excellent app. I can't take credit for it. My fiance actually found it, but an app called Yucca. There's also an app called Think Dirty. Both of these look like great apps. I've personally been using Yucca, and it's awesome because you can look at the products that you're using. You can see basically where their rating is as far as toxicity is concerned. And you can start kind of investigating for yourself what are better products or worse products that you may be using or may be looking to use. And you can look at things like your deodorant, your skincare. It also allows you to start looking at certain supplements and things in that line. So great app, great starting point. I feel like it is a perfect place for people that are looking to address the products that they're using on a consistent basis. And then some recommendations. Like I will say, as we start tapping into this, it's hard to find really good brands until you start doing your research. So a really good brand that I love is called Primally Pure. They have a lot of different skincare items, and specifically what I use is their deodorant. It's like a tallow-based deodorant. It is completely toxic-free. The one that I use is a charcoal-based deodorant, and it is one that actually works. I feel like it's hard to find an aluminum-free and toxic-free natural deodorant that isn't something that is going to leave stains in your clothes and is actually going to work. So these products actually do work. Incredible brand. I really like them. I do recommend checking them out. Native is another really good one. So Native has aluminum-free deodorant. They're also a great place when it comes to body soaps and anything else that you're going to be using kind of in the shower. Dr. Bronner's is, of course, a really good brand as far as organic soap and body wash. It's always great to turn organic because now you're making sure that, from beginning to end, you're using products that are never induced with pesticides or have any of these other toxins and chemicals that can kind of spread your way. So a few really good things to look at in that direction. The other kind of topic that goes hand in hand with BPAs and phthalates is microplastics. So microplastics are these tiny particles that are less than 5 millimeters in size. They come from broken down plastic waste, synthetic fibers, industrial processes, and they are basically right in our environment. They've been found in human blood or lungs, even in placentas. So these microplastics are really important to start looking at. They have a lot of the exact same effects when we start looking at, as far as phthalates and BPAs, because they're containing these chemicals. They have direct links to health risks like cellular and DNA damage. We see microplastics cause oxidative stress, so cellular stress, inflammation, like I said, DNA damage, and they increase the risk of cancer and other autoimmune diseases. There was a research study in 2022 in environmental science and technology that found that microplastics are in 80% of human blood samples, and which really starts raising concerns about what are the long-term health effects of the constant exposure to these microplastics. We do see direct impact in our endocrine systems. So as far as our hormones are concerned, many microplastics contain BPA, phthalates, and other endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs. So that can directly interfere with hormones, with fertility, with metabolism, with brain function. So these are not to be taken lightly. Obviously, we do need to have concern for them. There's even a study that looked at BPA exposure for microplastics, which had them directly linked to reduced sperm count, PCOS, and other thyroid disorders, and that was posted in the Journal of Endocrinology back in 2021. We also look at cardiovascular and circulatory impacts. So microplastics have been detected in arteries and heart tissue and potentially contribute to inflammation, clot formation, and even cardiovascular disease. So as we start looking into them, we start finding more and more exposure systemically in humans, including in our gut health and our immune system as well, directly linking to immune suppression. We have seen that microplastics alter the gut microbiome, increase inflammation, leaky gut syndrome, other autoimmune conditions. There was a study back in 2023 that was posted in Nature and found that mice exposed to microplastics had higher gut permeability and increased systemic inflammation. So we want to reduce that as much as possible, right? Like we don't want to deal with leaky gut. We also want to make sure that we're getting the proper nutrient absorption. We want to maintain our immune function. We want to keep ourselves healthy. So all of that seems to start getting impaired with more exposure to these microplastics, as well as respiratory issues. We see that inhaled microplastics from dust, synthetic fibers, air pollution accumulate in our lungs, potentially leading to chronic inflammation, fibrosis, and lung disease. And that was found in a study that was published in Environmental Pollution Journal back in 2022. So we see that microplastics are constantly around us, right? And it's important for us to know where we're getting this exposure so we can reduce that exposure as we continue through life. So water's a big one. I can say water, we even looked at a 2017 study which found that 93% of water bottle brands contain microplastics. It's found in tap water, bottled water. It's even found in filtered water. So you want to make sure that you have the right type of filter that's taking a lot of these things that we're actually going to talk about as we step into water here soon. Really ridding those from the water that we're drinking on a daily basis. So we'll talk about micron size and all that stuff here soon. Food and beverages, so seafood is a big one, shellfish, and any kind of fish that ingest plastic particles. A lot of sea salt is often contaminated too, so you want to know where you're getting your sea salt from. I really like Baja Gold sea salt. It has all the minerals in it. The way they process it is really clean. You're not worried about the additional of these microplastics and these other chemicals that go into it. We're also looking at plastic packaged food. So, there's a lot of chemicals that leach into our food. We'll talk more about that too when we look at our cookware and our food storage stuff, but plastics do have an impact there as well. And then even in things like tea bags and, some of our coffees and things like that. So it's important to take these seriously. Even our clothing, there's certain things that we cannot completely avoid. We also found that there was a study published by the University of California back in 2020 where they were specifically looking at fleece jackets, and they saw that fleece jackets released up to 250,000 fibers from microplastics per wash. So, they're in polyester, they're in nylon, they're in acrylic, spandex. A lot of them shed when they're washed, which is what that study was looking at. So, how do we basically keep ourselves taken care of, right? Because we see it, we talked about personal care products, we talked about our clothing, we talked about our food or water. At another podcast, we'll talk about kind of baby products as well. And once you have children, kind of the things that you want to keep an eye out for. But, that's another topic. There's a lot of microplastics and things that start populating into a lot of the childcare space as well, and into a lot of these things like diapers and baby bottles and things like that parents want to purchase on a consistent basis. Some of the easy ways that you can start filtering out microplastics, drinking filtered water. So a reverse osmosis system and having a high quality carbon filter are great water filter options. There are a lot of systems that we'll talk about a little bit later, but those are kind of easy ways to start making sure that your water is at least just clean. Avoiding plastic bottles. So whether you're looking at BPAs or you're trying to avoid phthalates or you're trying to avoid these microplastics, stay away from paper cups, stay away from these plastic cups, plastic water bottles, especially with heat exposure. A lot of these chemicals get activated with more and more heat, so they start leaching into our water and into our food, which is why obviously you want to be careful with the types of containers you're using when you're microwaving food and exposing them to high volumes of heat. So, we see water bottles from all over the world or the country are being transported. They're not temperature controlled, so there's a lot of risk of them being kept in sealed, hot environments and then activating those chemicals to be released from the plastics into your water. So, glass or stainless steel are your best friends when it comes to avoiding these types of chemicals. Wearing organic cotton, hemp, wool, or linen, and natural fibers are really important. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later today too in this podcast. But especially around reproductive organs, that's a really important thing. So opting for cotton-based underwear is an excellent way to avoid and protect the most crucial and highly absorbent areas of your body. So keep that in mind. Natural skincare products, right? Avoid plastics, microbeads, synthetic chemicals. We'll talk about, staying away from plastic food processed food and plastic packaged foods. Of course, if you can store your foods in glass or stainless steel, those are going to be your best friends. And then, of course, air quality, we can touch about that on a different topic as well. But HEPA filters and air filters, making sure that you're ventilating things really well is, a few ways that you can watch out for some of these. Okay, so the next thing that I really want to dive into is detoxing your cookware. So, we've talked about the risks of plastics and your drinkware and your cosmetics. We've talked about some of those endocrine disruptors and those toxins that you can be exposed to. So, detoxing those out of your life, looking at your cosmetics, looking at your products, looking at your shampoos, your lotions, things like that. It's kind of that first really nice, crucial step. And then also, what are we cooking with, right? And what are we using for food storage? So detoxifying that area of your life, your cookware, your kitchen, your home. One of the important things that I really want to touch on is Teflon. And so Teflon, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Teflon. For a long time, we've looked at nonstick coatings on the cookware that we've used, and we've thought, okay, if they're nonstick, then they're great. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the truth. So there are a lot of cookware, which unfortunately Teflon has kind of made its way into. It was a military and industrial chemical that was used for housing a number of different chemicals, including like plutonium and some of these other kind of high radiation risk materials. As the military kind of progressed and they started seeing that this material was just essentially bulletproof. It had a lot of industrial uses. It made its way into cookware, into the kitchen. And we see that a lot of these nonstick coatings like Teflon contain PFOAs and PFAs, which are known as forever chemicals. They never break down in our body or in the environment. They stick with us constantly. And these chemicals have been directly linked with cancer, liver disease, immune dysfunction, a number of other things. I can tell you there's been a lot of research that's specifically come around PFOAs and PFAs in firefighters' turnout gear. So in their bunker gear, what they're using when they go into a fire, they're trying to take a lot of those out. Unfortunately, a lot of their moisture barriers contain these chemicals for breathability and for to reduce overheating. And so they're starting to see more and more that there's a lot of high absorption of these materials and the release of these materials directly into very vital parts of our body when heat is introduced into them. So as we start talking about clothing and some of these other materials, forever chemicals, if you even kind of start looking at some of the research around firefighters, we see that there's a lot of direct links to cancer from these PFOAs and PFAs that are directly in their gear. And we see a lot of links in testicular cancer and reproductive issues. And we see a lot of issues around sperm count and sperm quality. So these chemicals are a real thing, especially having them in certain parts of your body, but also ingesting them is obviously a crucial component when we look at living a toxic-free lifestyle. There was a study back in 2020 by the CDC, which found that PFA chemicals are now present in the bloodstream of over 98% of Americans, which is crazy. That means that they're there, and we know they're everywhere, but we want to limit them as much as possible because we do know that exposure is linked to thyroid disease, high cholesterol, kidney cancer, several other different forms of cancer, metabolic issues. You want to have a metabolically stable body, or you're going to start noticing, for one, you're not going to feel good. You're not going to operate well. And then you're going to start noticing a number of other forms of dysfunction in your body, including on a cellular level and on a metabolic level, your mitochondria, your DNA, a number of things start to spiral from that point. So your cookware is a huge component. I highly recommend, if you haven't looked at the brand, Caraway is an excellent brand. A lot of people kind of wonder, what is a good brand of looking at that's not super expensive, that's kind of made for the average day person. Jordan Nathan, the CEO of Caraway, has spoken out a lot about how his brand came to be, and he unfortunately even had Teflon exposure and toxicity. And so he kind of created his brand based on his own experiences in and around the cooking industry, his own experiences in his own home when he was exposed to Teflon, and kind of how him and his wife kind of progressed into this brand of, kind of going down the rabbit hole of Teflon and PFOAs and PFAs and seeing how do we get that out of our cookware. And, one of the major things is most people are cooking on these non-stick Teflon coated pans that contain these forever chemicals on a constant basis. They're breaking down, people are consuming them. We even look at, we were talking about microplastics and we were talking about plastic containers. Those, even just scratching those, the amount of release of these microplastics and these chemicals can get released into the air and into your food. So we know it's a real thing, even just in our plastic food containers, let alone what we're cooking with, and these chemicals like Teflon. And everyone has had a Teflon pan or a pan at some point where that starts peeling and starts coming off. You start ingesting that into your food. You're cooking at high temps with it. It's just not good. So if you haven't heard of Caraway, excellent brand. They have a lot of products that they stand behind. They offer, essentially non-toxic ceramic, bakeware, cookware, food storage. A lot of their food storage is glass, which is fantastic. Glass or stainless steel is kind of the route that you want to go. They have excellent stainless steel pots and pans, something that's not crazy expensive. They have a lifetime warranty. They are a really reputable brand. I feel like a lot of people don't want to invest in stainless steel because of the cost, which is completely understandable. Stainless steel is an option for people that are looking for something that's naturally non-stick. At a certain temperature, it's going to heat up. You can drop water on it. You see it scatter across the pan. You're working in a non-stick state. And stainless steel lasts. It's very clean, as well as cast iron. So a lot of cast iron companies out there, Lodge or any number of them, have excellent typically just naturally non-stick and free of harmful coatings. So cast iron is great. I've cooked with cast iron for a long time. Some people see elevation in their iron levels from that. So if you're kind of wondering if maybe you're kind of more in an iron surplus, and is there a benefit to maybe staying away from cast iron? I personally think cast iron is an excellent form for cooking. I think it's something that you can't necessarily go wrong with. Most people obviously aren't worried about extremely high levels of iron unless you have a state of something called hemochromatosis. If you're kind of falling in that category, next one I would really lean toward is going to be some of the stainless steel pans, or something like a toxic-free kind of 100% ceramic material. So those are options, but definitely go through that. I personally have just kind of started doing a whole bunch more research into the kitchen. I cook a lot. I love cooking. So getting rid of any plastic cutting boards is a huge thing. Getting rid of any plastic utensils or cooking items in your kitchen is huge. Opt in for stainless steel utensils or tongs or spatulas, or go more towards the route of wood is another great option. Wooden cutting boards, things like that. Those keep those plastics out of your food. And I think this is huge. Obviously parents, people that have kids at home, if you're raising a family, if you want to live just a healthy life with your partner, you care about your loved ones. These are real things that impact people, especially now. Like, we are seeing more and more people that are in their early 20s, late 20s that are starting to want to have children, that are noticing more and more endocrine disruption, more metabolic issues, more and more cancer development. So, make the change. Super easy fix that you can take into your life. So, people look at, well, you're looking at what you're introducing into your body, into your skin, and into your teeth and things like that when it comes to the products you're using. So your toothpaste, your mouthwash, your deodorant, those are really big ones to kind of just look at and detoxify. Your kitchen is right there along with it. One of the next ones we're going to be talking about is your water. Those are like those big three that I've kind of mentioned. So easy, quick things that you can kind of swap out and start making a big impact in your life with. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what is in our water, which is kind of the next topic I want to go into. It would surprise you the amount of things that stay inside of our water. So it's a nice transition. I can tell you one of the big ones that I'm sure a lot of people have listened to, they've heard about, is fluoride. Fluoride is in fact in our water. There is risks, very real risks when it comes to fluoride exposure. We've been told for years that fluoride is necessary for dental health, but often left out is that fluoride is a neurotoxin, and long-term exposure on the brain and the endocrine system are really deeply concerning. So just as a nice kind of introduction, there was a 2019 study in JAMA Pediatrics. JAMA is really the go-to, well-known, top kind of research-based articles that you can look into. And they found that higher fluoride exposure during pregnancy is linked to lower IQ points in children, and that fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland, disrupting melatonin production and sleep cycles, and are specifically start leading towards a number of cognitive decline, insomnia, depression, and things in that nature. So our pineal gland is very, very important. We'll talk a lot about kind of how the pineal gland starts to become calcified and what that leads to, especially with fluoride exposure and some of these other toxins. So kind of jumping into that, the pineal gland, for anyone that doesn't know, is a small kind of pea-shaped gland that is deep in our brain, and it is responsible for producing melatonin, which is a very powerful antioxidant for our body. It's also a hormone that regulates our circadian rhythm, so our sleep and wake cycles. And it also plays very important roles in neuroprotection, which is where that antioxidant property comes from, mood regulation, as well as in a lot of cultures, and what a lot of people believe is it is our spiritual perception in a way as well, our third eye, our higher level thinking. So when we start looking at calcification of our pineal gland, we look at really how does it start. So calcification occurs when calcium phosphate deposits accumulate in the gland, and that leads to hardening and reduced function, which we don't want. We want to protect that gland as much as possible. Any glands in our body have a specific purpose, and we want to protect those for as long as we possibly can. Now, fluoride is a known neurotoxin that is known to directly accumulate in the pineal gland at higher levels than in bones. And that's kind of the key component. It is because it accumulates in the pineal gland at higher levels than our bones do, that contributes to its calcification. Studies show that calcification in the pineal gland results in lower melatonin output, which may impact sleep, mood, cognitive function, so many other things too. So that melatonin level is really important, especially when we start looking at IQ and higher level thinking, especially in our children. This is a important component to look at. A lot of questions what a lot of people look at is pineal calcification normal? Now, mild pineal calcification is common with age, but excessive calcification is linked to various different health issues that we'll talk about. By age 17, 18, most studies estimate that approximately 40% of people already have some pineal calcification. By adulthood, typically right around 60 to 70% of individuals have detectable calcification, but the degree varies significantly from person to person. But a very interesting thing is that it is seen in a lot of tribal and rural populations, indigenous people, that lower fluoride exposure shows significantly less pineal calcification. So they do see that there is a direct link here. Obviously, we want to reduce fluoride as much as possible with that information given. So what happens when the pineal gland is heavily calcified? Well, we start seeing reduced melatonin production, which equates directly to poor sleep quality, increased insomnia, disrupted circadian rhythm, or sleep and wake cycle. Neurocognitive decline is the next one. So potential association from this calcification. There's directly with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and lower IQ. There's also increased risks of mood disorders, so depression, anxiety. A lot of this may be linked directly to the melatonin regulation. And then as well as disruption in our endocrine function. So the pineal gland directly influences the hypothalamus pituitary axis. So that hypopituitary axis, it's basically how our body is perceiving what is going on and telling from our brain, and then telling our glands what needs to be produced from a hormone specific perspective. So it affects thyroids, adrenals, reproductive hormones. All of those are affected by the communication that comes from that hypopituitary axis. So can calcification be reduced and prevented? Yes. So people do have to make lifestyle changes. You do have to look at certain supplements to slow calcification, but it is a important thing to look at. Number one thing is reducing your fluoride intake. So have fluoride-free water, fluoride-free toothpaste, avoid processed foods with fluoridated water, and some of those great brands that you can look at, like as far as toothpaste is concerned, there's a company called Buca, which is great for a toothpaste that is free of fluoride. You're looking for something that contains nanohydroxyapatite instead, so something that's going to protect your teeth in place of fluoride. And, sorry for anybody that's a believer in fluoride protection for teeth. I am not. I truly look more at the other minerals that we're consuming, and up to and including things like nanohydroxyapatite, which helps to protect and revitalize your teeth. So those are the ingredients that you're looking for, especially when it comes to dental floss and things of that nature too. Iodine is right there in line with that too. So you want to limit fluoride intake, and then iodine is your next best friend as far as supplements is concerned. So this is going to help remove fluoride. It's going to support your pineal and thyroid function. You can take an iodine supplement specifically. You don't need a ton of iodine. It's very small. I think most of the times if you get an iodine supplement and it's in a liquid form, it's like 2 or 3 drops a day. It's very, very small amounts. You don't need a ton of it. You can also get it in seaweed and, a lot of other supplements too. Magnesium and potassium is really important too. It kind of helps direct calcium to the bones and prevents it from accumulating in soft tissue. And then fulvic acid, right next to iodine. Fulvic acid is a very important component. It is a heavy metal detox. It flushes a lot of parasites out of your body, and it can specifically decalcify your pineal gland. Fulvic acid is in supplements like Shilajit. You can get like a 75 or 85% fulvic acid component. You can get soaks and scrubs that have fulvic acid. I like Shilajit. I think it's excellent to take in the morning. It's great for energy and focus and hormone production and regulation. I love the fulvic acid component. I actually get mine from a company called Better Alt, which has organic honey. So makes it nice to take first thing in the morning, and you get your Shilajit and you get some organic honey with it too, which has a lot of really great benefits for your body. So another great brand that you guys can check out. And then sleep and sunlight is going to be important as well. So direct sunlight, it's exposure to your activation of your pineal gland, as well as melatonin production. That's going to help directly correlate with your sleep-wake cycle. So that's why it is important. If you can, most people can't. I'm one of the people that can't, but waking up to sunlight is, typically the best way to go. Getting direct sunlight. So as soon as the sun does come up, if you're one of those people like myself who is up before the sun comes up and you have a busy day and you're working, obviously morning to evening, get outside, get some sunlight directly in your eyes. Those are going to be important for your circadian rhythm, that sleep-wake cycle, as well as activation of that pineal gland. So, little component on water or on fluoride. I can also tell you that as far as water filters are concerned, there's a lot of water filters out there. A reverse osmosis water filter with an add back option to remineralize your water is kind of the best. You can go really neurotic with water. I tell people, obviously, it's important to get your water clean. Like I said, it would surprise you the kind of things that are inside of your water. When we go into talking about parasites and detoxes, which I think will be the next episode, we'll speak a lot more on the importance of water and looking at, obviously, parasites and things like that. The important thing when it comes to your water is getting a filter that cleans out all the bad stuff down to at least 0.5 microns. A lot of them you can find down to 0.2 microns, even 0.1 microns. Those are important for your water filters. There's a lot of great companies. I just bought one that's called Alexapure. Alexapure is a really nice company that they have just a nice tabletop water filter that gets rid of fluoride and chlorine and these heavy metals and plastics and a lot of the big concerns that people have, parasites, bacteria. So easy. I use it for myself. I use it for the dog's water. I use it, just easily and readily available. There's also a company called PurePod, which I love when I'm on the go because you don't have to worry about getting a plastic water bottle or trying to find some crazy water filter. It's something that you can actually directly just drop into your water. They make them for dogs as well, but they have seen that same thing. It filters out like 99.9% of all the things that we're talking about down to, I think it's 0.2 microns as well. And it gets rid of the fluoride and the bacteria. You look at E. coli and some of these other things, parasites, it's able to filter out all of that. And it works as a big magnet. So the research is actually really interesting. Check out PurePod. They have a really cool story about how they came together and a lot of great information on their product. And then from there, you can also look at other things, right? Like there is a Berkey water filter, which removes fluoride, chlorine, microplastics, heavy metals. Those ones start getting a little bit more pricey. It's kind of when you start looking back at a whole house water filter. You can look at, if you're looking at whole home water filters, like I said, reverse osmosis is something that's clearing out all the bad stuff from your water. An add back feature is going to give you the opportunity to remineralize your water, which is the next step. And then after that, if you want to go forth for the next step of your water, you can look at hydrogenizing your water, which is basically adding an additional hydrogen molecule onto water. It works to essentially make it more alkaline. A lot of people don't realize that alkaline water it doesn't directly change your blood pH. So, you don't get the lasting benefits like you really do from hydrogenized water, which is going to really work more towards getting your blood pH in your body into a more optimized zone there. So less acidic, really high acidic bodies are not able to fight off infection. So there's a lot of really good benefits to taking in a hydrogenized water, or a water that obviously is more alkalinic. So do your own research. We can talk more about that in later episodes. But so that's kind of what I do as far as water is concerned, and as far as detoxifying my body from these things like fluoride, chlorine, these microplastics. So, and when we talk about like the 0.1 or 0.2 microns, you're looking at your filters are basically like a mesh, so much like clothing. So the more of those fibers that are on there, and the more that it can catch and filter out, like I said, specifically when we start looking at things like parasites and the other things that are living inside of our water, to an important piece for people to keep a close eye on and use to detoxify their bodies. One of the next components, which I feel like is really important, that I really want to step into, is talking more about hormonal-based birth control. So there are a lot of inherent risks when it comes to hormonal-based birth control that I don't think a lot of people quite realize. I have been working in and around the hormone space now for multiple years, and I've seen firsthand a lot of women that unfortunately are not given the education that they necessarily need around hormonal-based contraceptives. So these still are hormone-impacting chemicals. These are still things that are messing with your ovulation. They're messing with your menstrual cycle. They are directly working in your body, similar to things like bioidentical hormones. They have much more risks. They are not anywhere in anything that I would recommend for anybody. And we see a lot of women, for example, are put on hormonal-based birth control. They start noticing, from that estrogen component or from that progestin component, they start noticing irritability, mood disorders, anxiety, depression, and then they're placed on a antidepressant, and then they are on these hormonal-based contraceptives for a prolonged time, and they start developing issues long-term with fertility and any number of things. We also see, when we start talking about mental health, there's a lot of research kind of when we start talking about ketamine and some of these other kind of alternative options when it comes to mental health. There's a lot of research that shows that, if you're experiencing depression for, let's just say 18 months or longer, we start seeing up to 50% of your serotonin receptors start to get severely damaged, and they attempt to essentially die off and disappear. So that's one component. We're putting these women on these hormonal-based birth controls, and we're not educating them on the dangers, which we'll speak about in a second. And then it directly affects their mood. We put them on an antidepressant, and we're ultimately just causing a vicious cycle, which is further deteriorating their serotonin and dopamine receptors, and making it harder and harder to improve their mood. And then the longer they're on these, we see direct endocrine disruption, especially as they start heading more towards menopause and perimenopause. So we see faster hormone decline, and then we're also seeing reproductive issues. So it is unfortunate. I think a lot of women, and I'm excited for the episode when we talk about menopause and perimenopause and the importance of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and getting rid of the myths and the misconceptions. But hormonal-based contraceptives are a big one. I can tell you from experience with my fiance, she was on the Depo-Provera injection, and then she was doing an oral contraceptive as well. She was contraindicated, like a lot of women are, for estrogen-based contraceptives because she gets aura migraine. So, which is interesting because it is no longer offered orally. Estrogen is no longer offered orally because of the toxicity risk, the harshness on the liver, and then of course the risk of stroke. But we are prescribing a hormonal contraceptive in the form of estrogen, and there are still inherent risks when it comes to clotting and stroke and toxicity but we're still prescribing it. So thank goodness she was contraindicated for that. There's a lot of women that unfortunately aren't. They're put on these hormonal contraceptives that are estrogen-based and unfortunately have much higher clotting risks and stroke risks. So a non-hormonal based contraceptive is a much better way to go. She got off the Depo-Provera, had close to a year of regulation she had to go through before she her menstrual cycle or ovulation, everything got back on track. This is pretty typical for a lot of women that come off Depo-Provera. It is very hard on the body. It's very hard on the mood. It's hard on the brain. And then even women that are on any kind of oral-based birth control as well, same thing. It's really messing with your body. It's messing with your metabolism. It messes a lot with your water hormones. You're holding on to more water. You're holding on to more weight. And then you have to time everything more when it comes to nutrition. And we see, obviously, long-term effects that we'll dive into. There's a lot of studies that show that synthetic hormones in birth control can disrupt natural hormone production, increasing the risk of infertility, mood disorders, and metabolic issues. So I tell everyone, obviously, do your own research. I've been in and around this space for a while. One of the amazing doctors that I've had the pleasure of working with in his team is Dr. David Rosensweet. He wrote the book Happy Healthy Hormones. I definitely recommend reading that if you're a woman that is perimenopausal, you're heading into menopause, you're in menopause, maybe you have a daughter or a close friend that's on some kind of an oral or injection that is a hormonal-based contraceptive. Read it. There's a lot of information around hormones, but he even specifically warns that hormonal birth control overrides the body's natural endocrine system, suppressing ovulation and often leading to long-term hormonal imbalances that don't always correct after discontinuation. So in that, there's a lot of studies that have come out that specifically are looking at these contraceptives and depression. And I think that's an important piece for a lot of women to hear about, particularly in adolescent users. There's increases in depression, anxiety, and suicidal behavior. We see that there's studies from large cohorts, including the Danish National Registry, which has 1 million plus women, the UK Biobank, which has almost 300,000 women, and there's a lot of research between the both of them where they're seeing hormonal contraceptive users having anywhere from a 20 to 70% increased risk of developing depression. That's pretty substantial. Not to mention the highest vulnerability being in teenage users, which is obviously where most women are starting. And that's also ties into, we see there's obviously a lot higher rates in the first few months of use, which tells you something as well, right? Like your body's adjusting. There's a heightened latency period. And so something to obviously consider. There's also, as far as like the progestin only methods, like pills and the implants, they do have stronger mood altering effects than combination pills. So keep that in mind as well. A lot of people do see that these do correct after coming off of them, but there is a period of correction. It does not happen overnight. It takes several months. There's a lot of studies that show that there's women that can correct these issues and conceive within the first year. But I can tell you, especially if you look at Depo-Provera, there's a lot of women that are seeing a year to 18 months just trying to get their body back on track, especially if they've been on it for several years. So we see, for example, when women that are on these agents that are suppressing natural hormone production, they're also altering the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, which is that hypopituitary axis that controls obviously our testicular and ovarian hormone communication that drive to release these hormones. We see lower levels of natural estrogen and progesterone while on the pill, reduced production of a lot of neurohormones that regulate anxiety and stress, changes in cortisol response, which increases inflammation and affects mood, We see temporary suppression of ovarian function with ovulation returning and, after discontinuation, but obviously depending on the time frame, and then circadian rhythm disruption. So that affects sleep and energy levels and mood. So just kind of depends. I can tell you that there was a 2018 systematic review of about 15,000 women. It's only 15,000 women, but they did find that out of those 15,000 women, around 80% of them that stopped birth control conceived within the first 12 months after stopping birth control. That obviously doesn't go into Depo-Provera injections. It also doesn't go into any of the other changes that their body underwent. So that is just them having the ability to conceive. I can tell you when we factor in all of the other toxic exposure and the fertility issues that people are having, adding this to the mix makes it harder and harder to conceive. So if we are already putting our foot on the brakes, we're dealing with toxicity, we're disrupting our DNA, now we're adding a hormonal contraceptive on top of that, with all of these hormone disruptors that we've already talked about, that hypopituitary axis gets more and more damaged, and we see it harder and harder to correct. We see this all the time in young men as well. There's a lot of young men that start testosterone at a really early age and suppress their body's natural production of testosterone. And there is a rehab period, just like for women, if they're going off of oral contraceptives or injections like Depo-Provera, there's a time frame of where their body really has to restore that communication. We basically severed the link, flipped off the switch in a sense, or cut the wire, where now our body is saying, hey, we don't need these hormones. We don't need to produce these anymore. We can shut off the communication to the ovarian or testicular glands. And basically we rely on what we're getting. And the other thing too is our hormones are all set on a specific level. So as we start messing with one, we're messing with others. We speak about men too. Obviously, I know that we're still speaking about women and hormonal contraceptives, but comparing them, there's a lot of men that as they go on testosterone, if they get these spikes, estrogen is going to fluctuate as well. So same thing with women. As we start messing with progesterone or estrogen, testosterone, we're going to be messing with the other hormones because our body needs to regulate to maintain homeostasis, or that state of normalizing the body. So in and of a whole, I can tell you that when hormones are getting inappropriately messed with, and we're not talking about men that are in andropause or not producing enough testosterone, we're not talking about women that are perimenopausal or going into menopause that don't produce enough of their ovarian hormones. We're talking about young women that are hormonally perfect, that are going through puberty and going through all these hormonal changes and progression, and we're putting them on a form of birth control that is metabolically and from an endocrine perspective that is disrupting their hormone regulation and production, and causing impacts on fertility. And a big one is mental health. Right now, there is a huge issue in depression and mental health, especially in adolescence. So if that resonates with you, if you have children, if you are on somebody that is in this age group or that's on some form of hormonal contraceptive, I do implore you to look into alternatives. Some of the best routes are really now people are tracking, women are specifically tracking ovulation. They're specifically tracking their menstrual cycle. They can see when they are most fertile, and then taking that approach as well as the approach of abstinence around those times where they're highly fertile are much better routes. Obviously, men have a lot of other options when it comes to protection, and I recommend that route rather than taking the route of placing women on these horrible endocrine disruptors and hormone suppressants and altering what their body naturally needs to go through, especially from a brain chemical balance as well. So consider that. Obviously, there's like copper IUDs as well. A lot of women do report that they're having heavier and more crampier periods in a sense. It's much harder on their body. So just depends. Also, the placement and the procedure to implant a copper IUD is not pleasant. So I do recommend for a lot of women to look at some of these other routes. And then I can also tell you that specifically in hormonal contraceptives, there is an increased cancer risk. So specifically in breast cancer and cervical cancer, like I said, these contraceptives, these synthetic hormones are much different than bioidentical hormones. So when we talk about women that are actually needing bioidentical hormone replacement because they are perimenopausal or menopausal, these are not the same. These are not the same chemicals or, bioregulators. So completely different subject. But there are a lot of studies that are showing obviously increased breast and cervical cancer from that perspective too. So in my opinion, there are far better routes than a hormonal contraceptive for women. And that is a huge form of toxicity that a lot of people should limit in their daily intake or prescription. From the men's side, one of the last topics that I'll talk about too, I have one other after this, but toxic fabrics. This kind of goes for men and women. I can tell you that there is a lot of synthetic materials that are inside of most athletic wear and underwear that contain endocrine disrupting chemicals like phthalates. We talked about those, formaldehyde, PFAs. We spoke about those forever chemicals that leach into our skin. I spoke a little bit about firefighters earlier. I can tell you there's a lot of firefighters that we're seeing increases in testicular cancer and issues in fertility and the formation of their sperm, primarily because they started seeing when they go into a fire and they're exposed to these harmful carcinogens and these cancer-causing toxins that they had, things like PFAs that they're exposed to that sit on top of the shrouds, so their hoods that they wear. When they take them off, they had several firefighters that were putting their gloves, which were exposed to these chemicals, and their shrouds in the crotch of their pants. And our body, those chemicals stay, those carcinogens stay. But the important factor is that the reproductive areas of our body, and are specifically like testicles, for example, are a very, very absorbent area of our body. And they are very susceptible to impact from these chemicals and these carcinogens that leach into our skin. So both men and women, it is important to have some type of protection in and around your privates when you are sweating and working out. These types of synthetic materials can directly impact our body and cause cancers. They can cause endocrine disruption. They can cause endometriosis. They can cause any number of things. And so I can tell you, finding a 100% organic cotton-based material, there's a company called NADS, which is great. They've started coming out with an organic cotton-based underwear. Something to protect your body in that sense is going to be important, especially because the more heat we're exposed to, the hotter that area gets, the more porous and absorbent it basically is. And so now we are soaking up so much more of those chemicals at a time. And so super interesting research. If you look at firefighters, obviously they're exposed to extremely high temperatures, and they see that their body becomes much, much more susceptible to taking in and holding onto these chemicals in those states. So I can tell you too, there was a study that was published in 2021 in Environmental Science and Technology that found that PFAs were detected in 60% of popular synthetic athletic wear brands. So they're all around us. They also found that these chemicals are absorbed through the skin and directly linked to reproductive disorders. So obviously we start talking about fertility. Infertility is on the rise. There's a lot of people that are dealing with it. So look at healthier options. You look at wool. You look at, like I said, 100% organic cotton. Something that's that material is breathable. It's non-toxic. So cotton is definitely the way to go. Turn towards that. It's a direct link that a lot of people can very easily change, especially men. Something that can change. Women as well, obviously wearing yoga pants and these synthetic materials that are directly leaching into their skin in those vital areas. Having some form of protection is going to be important. So same thing, organic materials, organic cotton-based materials is going to be important. Getting rid of those forever chemicals. The last topic that I really want to speak about and kind of conclude on is EMF. So EMF, RF, magnetic fields, low level or extremely low level frequency radiation as well. Kind of talk about that. I think there's a lot of concerns around it. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily know exactly what this does. But there is a lot of scientific research that has increasingly investigated how the exposure to these electromagnetic fields or EMFs, including radio frequency, radiation like RF from wireless devices, magnetic field exposure. We look at things like our electrical appliances, our Wi-Fi routers, as well as electrical or extremely low level frequency radiation, which comes from power lines, microwaves, things like that. There are direct links to issues in male and female fertility, impacts on sperm quality, disrupting female hormone cycles, increasing oxidative stress and DNA damage. So I really do want to jump into that a little bit more. As far as EMF and male fertility, which is an important piece, studies have consistently shown that RF radiation from mobile phones, laptops, and Wi-Fi routers or Wi-Fi enabled devices have a direct reduction in sperm count, motility, and viability. So you're looking at fertility, those are kind of the three components for men. There was a 2014 meta-analysis that found an 8% reduction in sperm motility and viability in men who frequently used mobile phones, which is just about everyone. So basically, we're looking at the entire, at least the United States, if not the entire world, because just about everybody has a mobile phone that's Wi-Fi enabled, that's getting constant exposure, especially because most men are putting their phones in their front pocket, which I am guilty of as well. And we see, so basically every man is seeing an 8% reduction in sperm motility and viability. So that's one component as well. If you're trying to have kids, watch where you're keeping your mobile phones. There was a study by Argwell back in 2010 that found that men who kept mobile phones in their front pockets had significantly lower sperm concentrations and higher sperm DNA fragmentation. So they're not formed right. We're having obviously more and more DNA issues and damage to that DNA. We also saw that ELF radiation from power lines, high voltage electrical jobs, is linked to higher rates of sperm abnormalities in workers that are exposed to these prolonged magnetic fields. So obviously there's a direct link. We also want to look at DNA damage and oxidative stress. So RF and ELF radiation have been shown to induce oxidative stress in sperm cells, leading to higher rates of sperm DNA fragmentation and decreased fertility. It's another component. There was a study by Desai back in 2018 that noted that RF exposure significantly increased reactive oxygen species, which of course is that damage to the cells. We don't want a ton of reactive oxygen species. We'll talk more about that when we talk about NAD and cancer and things in that rate. But reactive oxygen species is directly linked to cancer and other disease processes, neurocognitive decline like Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, specifically in this case, fertility issues, because it's specifically causing reactive oxygen species in the testicles, which can cause genetic damage and what we call apoptosis, or the death of sperm cells. Apoptosis is just the death of cells. Obviously, we're seeing that, not long ago, back in 2018, we were seeing significantly increased rates of reactive oxygen species and cell death in sperm cells in men that were exposed to radio frequencies. And we talk about like Wi-Fi enabled devices and things like that. There was animal studies that confirmed these effects as well. So mice exposed to RF and EMF showed increased testicular oxidative damage, DNA fragmentation, and reduced sperm count. So direct issues in fertility. When we look at EVs and magnetic fields, we look at electromagnetic fields that get generated from electric vehicles. We see that electric vehicles generate strong magnetic fields. particularly from their batteries and from their regenerative braking systems. Now, studies suggest that prolonged exposure to these fields while driving may contribute to reduced sperm quality, although there is a lot more research that's needed. Now, as far as EMFs and female fertility, when we look at hormone disruption and menstrual cycle irregularities, we do see that RF and ELF exposure can alter ovarian function by disrupting the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, so the HPO. Same thing, we're talking more about that communication axis between our brain and these glands that release these hormones, specifically in women, their ovaries, which produce the ovarian hormones. There was a study back in 2021 that also found that women with high occupational exposure to ELF radiation had more frequent more menstrual irregularities and lower progesterone levels. Progesterone is a huge component. Women have 4 ovarian hormones. They have progesterone, estrogen, DHEA, and testosterone. Women are much more complex hormonally than men are, and we'll talk about that obviously as we get into more of the hormone episodes of this podcast. But having irregularities in progesterone is not good. Progesterone is very protective of our endometrial lining. So in women, that hormone is very, very key for the protection of those reproductive areas of their body. Animal models also showed that RF exposure led to prolonged estrogen cycles and reduced ovarian follicle count, potentially decreasing fertility. When we also look at ovarian reserve and egg quality, we saw that there was a lot of studies on RF radiation that indicated chronic exposure may reduce ovarian reserve, leading to a lower number of viable eggs over time. There was a 2019 rodent study that actually showed that female rats exposed to mobile phone RF and EMFs had significantly fewer developing follicles and increased oxidative stress in the ovaries. So more damage, like we talked about men and sperm count. That oxidative stress specifically in the ovaries is decreasing egg count, egg quality, and obviously viability of those eggs as well to be able to reproduce. As well as increased risk in miscarriage. So there was EMFs, we do see that EMFs from power lines and wireless devices have been linked to a higher risk of miscarriage. There's a 2017 study from Kaiser Permanente that found that pregnant women exposed to high levels of EMFs had nearly triple the risk of miscarriage compared to those with lower exposure. Obviously, different populations, different people are going to have higher exposure versus lower exposure, but we can see there is a direct link and correlation between exposure to EMF, RF, low frequency radiation, and these things like miscarriages and infertility and things like that. As far as the increased risk of reproductive cancers as well, prolonged ELF exposure has been linked to higher rates of testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, and leukemia, specifically in power line workers, which have the highest rates of exposure to ELF radiation. And then studies have shown a potential connection between between EMFs and hormone-related cancers, likely due to chronic oxidative stress and endocrine disruption. So we're suppressing hormones and we're causing further cellular damage and metabolic damage. So all of 3 of those obviously make sense why we're getting a direct link to some of these cancers. There's also a lot of lawsuits that have been in occupation and exposure risks that workers in electrical and telecommunication industries that are exposed to high ELF power line or ELF levels in power lines, specifically in power line workers, have filed lawsuits linking their exposure to blood and bone cancers. Power line workers and those with chronic exposure to industrial EMFs show higher rates of leukemia, as well as sperm abnormalities and infertility issues and things like that. So obviously, electromagnetic frequencies, radio frequencies, this form of radiation, how do we protect our bodies from this? How do we limit the exposure? So some of the easy ones is keeping your mobile phones away from your reproductive organs, trying to keep, obviously, reducing the direct contact, the space, not keeping your phone in your front pocket, using wired headphones rather than wireless headphones to reduce that RF exposure directly to your head, not keeping your phone directly to your ear, So keep it on a speaker or, in your car or whatnot. Avoid sleeping near your Wi-Fi routers. You can, also don't place your phones right on your pillows. Turning off your wireless devices when you're not in use, especially at night when you're sleeping. So turning off your Wi-Fi router, turning off your phone's cellular, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi enabled connections, making sure that they're completely shut off in your settings. You can also use things like Faraday bags. So Faraday bags are excellent. They're like this copper wire mesh bag, which is fantastic for protecting against electromagnetic pulses, so EMPs. If you're a prepper, I'm sure that you know about Faraday bags, but Faraday bags are pretty cool because they also protect you from these devices. You can slip that in there, they make really big ones that you can cover your Wi-Fi router with, or you just slip your phone in this little bag and wrap it up. And it, depending on the quality, Faraday bags, basically the smaller the tighter that mesh line of copper wire, the better it is able to cut off that signal, essentially, for Wi-Fi and for cellular data and things like that. So there's a company called Silent. You can look at Silent. There's also obviously options on Amazon. But there's a lot of American-made Faraday bags that you can use. They have backpacks that are lined with, this copper lining, small little kind of slotted bags, even like pants and jackets and all kinds of really cool stuff. So you're looking at ways to reduce the exposure. Look at Faraday bags. It's definitely an option. If you are couples that are trying to conceive, reducing EMF exposure may improve your fertility outcomes. I can say that it is definitely, there's a lot of direct research with it. So if you're looking to improve your fertility, exposure to these toxins is a real thing, especially to EMF, which I'm going to also consider, essentially a form of toxic exposure. So like I said, we want to take our foot off the brake. We want to allow our body to be able to function as well as possible. So take that as you will. Those are kind of my big go-tos on getting your health in line and kind of the first step towards promoting a better, healthier version of yourself. So the reality is that we can't eliminate 100% of toxins from our lives, but we can drastically reduce our exposure by switching to cleaner cookware, filtering your water, avoiding plastics and microplastics, reducing EMF exposure, wearing natural fabrics. This can all significantly improve your long-term health. And really the goal is, I think, at least from my perspective, I'm not here to try and live to be 120 and in a wheelchair and obviously not living my life. My goal is to live as healthy for as long as I can. So being able to constantly move and feel good and have a strong functioning brain and high-level thinking for as long as I possibly can. I think a lot of people have a lot of direct links and a lot of family history when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia and any number of things, cancer. So these are ways to protect yourself, keep yourself healthy, and living a longer, fuller, better life for as long as you possibly can. So take action today. Some of the things that you can do, obviously, just start swapping out one product at a time. Use the Yucca app. Take one toxic product and swap it for a clean product this week, and prioritize your gut health, your hormone balance, detoxifying heavy metals. Look at some of the things like fulvic acid and iodine, trying to get fluoride out of your water. And ultimately, your health is in your hands. So take this information. Let's build a cleaner, healthier future together. And I just want to tell you all, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to this podcast today and staying with me on this journey. I hope that it was informative. I hope that it gives you some guidance and some direction and, just helps you find a balance in your life. We are never going to be able to avoid every toxin. It's just how it is. But giving your body the best possible way of that balance in your food, balance in your daily habits, and obviously helping you with yourselves, with your children, and so on for generations. So thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking to you all again next week. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into the Vitalis Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, we would be so grateful if you'd leave a rating and a review. It truly helps us grow. And share this episode with friends and family who are also on a journey towards deeper health and truth. To stay up to date on weekly episodes, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and follow us on Instagram at the Vitalis Podcast. Please remember the content shared on this show is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not a substitute for personalized medical or mental health advice, nor does it establish a provider-patient relationship. Always consult with your physician or qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your health protocols.